the sound is better. Hold on. Okay, testing, see if the sound is better. Nope, still quiet. Okay, all right, I'm working on it. Ooh, how about that? Better? Worse? Same? Yes, okay, great. I'm becoming an expert at this. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, as I was saying, next week, no live streamed classes. I'm just going to have Zoom office hours. Great, thank you, guys. I'm just going to have office hours on Zoom. You can find my Zoom meeting ID on the updated syllabus on Blackboard. Go ahead and drop in. Sorry, I tried to fix it. Go ahead and drop in, send me an email, whatever. Okay, so those are all the announcements. I'm not turning it back down. It took me forever to turn it up. Give me 1 second, please. Yes, I will still be posting the slides, Madeline. In fact, I put them up. I just put them up this morning. Give me 1 second here. I'm showing you the wrong. Okay. So we're continuing with the spectrum of competition here. Give it 1 second for your stream to catch up. I can see that you're behind. Okay, whatever, that's my fault. Okay, continuing with the spectrum of competition, we're going to review the two extremes of the spectrum that we have already gone over before we dive into the center of the spectrum, which is more complicated because it is closer to reality and less of a theoretical jumping off point, right? So once we set these theoretical endpoints of the spectrum, we can start to adjust certain properties to create a model that is closer to reality. Okay, so on the far left of the spectrum, we started with perfect competition. In perfect competition, marginal revenue equals marginal cost equals average total cost equals price. In perfect competition, demand is perfectly elastic. There are infinite producers, so if you charge any more or any less than other producers, you're going out of business right away. And that's a property of perfect elasticity that we talked about in chapter 5. Okay. And then at the other end of the spectrum, which we talked about on Wednesday, we have the monopoly, where instead of infinite producers and infinite consumers buying and selling one identical good, we have one producer producing that good. Oh my God, you can't even see the freaking slides. I didn't even realize. Hold on. This is a disaster. Yes, Carl, you are. It will fix in a moment. Okay, great. All right, then we talked about monopolies on Wednesday. And the steps to reading a monopoly graph here. A monopoly is, as we said, an economic structure in which one firm is producing a good, and the monopolist will produce a quantity of goods at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Here's our marginal cost curve. Marginal cost will always look like this, easy to find. And this is our marginal revenue. So we're going to produce at the quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And then to find the price that we're going to charge at that given quantity we're producing, we're going to take this quantity line and we're going to trace it up to the demand curve and bounce it over to our y-axis, and that's going to show us the price we need to charge. This whole section here, the purple box plus the pink box, is the firm's total revenue, the total amount of money the monopolist is bringing in. If you subtract the total cost to the monopolist of producing these goods, you'll get the purple box, which is total profit. Okay, so those are our two bookends of the spectrum of competition. We're going to get into the middle now. Any questions on the ends of the spectrum before we get into the middle? All right. Chapter 10, Imperfect Competition. The economic structures we'll be studying here are monopolistic competition, which is the one that is most like the real world, and oligopoly. Oligopoly is similar to a monopoly, except there's more than one main producer. We're going to start with monopolistic competition first. Okay. Excuse me. So we did perfect competition, and if we're living in a world where we're buying and selling shapes and colors, in a perfect competition, the only thing for sale is a red square. And in a monopoly, the only thing the firm is selling is red squares as well. Now we're in the middle. It's a little bit more nebulous. Now, instead of only having red squares for sale, we have red squares and blue squares and red triangles. The products have become differentiated. A differentiated product is a product that we perceive as distinctive in some way. Now, consumers are allowed to have preferences. Products can be differentiated by their physical aspects, the shape of the product, the color of the product. They can be differentiated by the seller location. I tend to shop at CVS instead of the dollar store because CVS is closer to me. Intangible aspects. Something you can't see or touch, but something you still value. Maybe the red squares are organic, and that's something that you value as a consumer. They're organic, and that's something that differentiates them from other products. And also perceptions. Maybe you just like the packaging of a certain product. Maybe you think that a certain product is better for the environment. I was out of dog shampoo, so I had to use dish soap to wash Karen last night. You're not supposed to use human shampoo because the pH is wrong. Had to use dish soap, and I went under the sink to get some dish soap, and there was some brand, I don't remember. And there was also Dawn dish soap. And on the packaging for Dawn dish soap, as you know, they've got like those little ducklings on the packaging to show that they use Dawn dish soap to clean little ducklings that have been affected by oil spills. So that's the one I went for. I thought if it's good enough for a duckling that's been affected by an oil spill, it's good enough for my gross dog. That was something that differentiated that dish soap in my mind. Absolutely, Benjamin. The labor market is a monopolistic competition, and you'll find that most markets in reality are monopolistically competitive. Okay. So what does the demand curve look like in a monopolistic competition? It looks like you would expect. This third graph is our monopolistic competition, and we have a regular demand curve. Let's compare this to the demand curves for a perfect competition and a monopoly. In a perfect competition, demand is perfectly elastic. The firm can sell any amount of output it wants because there are infinite consumers, but it has to charge the exact market price. In a perfect competition, firms are price takers and they only decide the quantity to produce. The price is decided for them before they even enter the market. And then in a monopoly, you can see we're starting to see this downward sloping demand that we're used to. If you want to sell more output, you got to decrease your price. It's the law of demand. And you can see that it's a little bit more inelastic, right, by the nature of a monopoly. The monopolist being the only producer of a product. This is similar to the EpiPen example we went over in class. If the monopolist is the only producer of a product, then there are likely fewer substitutes for the product. If the monopolist is, if there's only one firm selling red squares, and you really want a red square, you got to buy it just from that guy. So demand is a little bit more inelastic for the monopolist. And then we get over to the monopolistic competitor, and our demand curve looks like it should. It looks like we're used to. It falls in between the perfect competitor and the monopoly. Increased price decreases the quantity demanded. We're holding the basic law of demand. And we're going to choose some combination of quantity to produce and price to charge along the demand curve. Obviously, if we slap a supply curve in there, the quantity and price to choose are very obvious. But we're focused just on demand right now. What does consumer action look like to the monopolistically competitive firm? Okay. We are again going to be producing a quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. You want the additional money that you get from selling an additional tomato to be equal to the additional cost to you of producing that additional tomato. So if we want to maximize our profit, this is very similar to reading the monopolist's graph that we went over. You're going to find your marginal cost curve. Here she is. Okay. Marginal cost curve. Here she is, this upward sloping one we're used to. And we're going to find our marginal revenue, which is this downward sloping line. And we're going to find where those two cross, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. If we draw this line down to the x-axis, we will find our equilibrium quantity. That's about 40 down here. Okay, so we know we should be producing 40 things. How much should we charge for these things? You're going to take this point and you're going to draw it up to the demand curve. When we look at where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, we're getting an understanding of the actions the firm wants to take. And when we trace this up to the demand curve, this is the point at which we're bringing consumers into the decision process. Okay, so this is the quantity we want to produce. How much do you guys want this thing? So we trace this up to the demand curve, bounce right off of there, over to the y-axis, and this is the price we'll be charging. So I put that P star here is 15, but it's more like 16. I don't know. I don't know why your book doesn't just use whole obvious numbers. Anyway, Same thing with this graph. The purple box plus the pink box is our total revenue. And if we subtract the costs of production from our total revenue, we're going to get our total profit, which is this purple box. Okay. These next few slides include some complicated looking graphs. I don't want you to panic. I never want you to panic. The graphs are there just in case you're a visual learner and it's something that you would like to see and something that helps you. If it doesn't help you, completely ignore it. It's a good philosophy in life as well. Okay, so in perfect competition, we don't have any barriers to entry. Barriers to entry, that's a new vocabulary term that we just started, and it means the cost to the firm of entering or exiting a market. The actual costs, this actual startup costs of moving your business from your mom's garage to an actual business location, hiring employees, knowledge costs, getting to know the market, knowing who else is involved in the market, knowing how much people are selling their products for. In a perfect competition, we just assume that all these costs are zero, and you can enter and exit the market at any point for totally free. Okay. In a monopolistic competition, similar to a perfect competition, if firms already in the market are making a profit, other firms will be encouraged to enter, right? If one shark gets a seal, other sharks will figure out that that one's got a seal, and they will enter the feeding frenzy. I got to come up with a better example. When firms enter the market, we're seeing demand shifting backward. As firms enter the market, consumers have more options, so we can consume the same quantity at a lower price. Okay. As more and more and more firms enter the market, because profits are remaining positive, we're going to see the profits of that original firm driven down to zero. Because if more and more and more firms enter the market, we are getting closer and closer to perfect competition. Perfect competition has infinite producers, infinite firms, and profit is zero. So now that we're dealing in the middle of the spectrum of competition, you can see how tweaking certain attributes will bring us closer to one pole of perfect competition or closer to the other pole of monopoly. Okay. The opposite is also true. If a firm is making negative profits, the firm will leave the industry. And as firms leave the industry, demand for the original firm increases. In this example, we are taking our monopolistic competition and moving it closer to monopoly, right? The more firms that exit an industry, the closer your individual firm gets to being a monopolist. The more firms that enter the industry, the closer your individual firm gets to being a perfect competitor. Okay. So let's talk about the long run here. Okay. In a perfect competition, firms sell at the price level determined by the lowest point on the average cost curve. How do we know this? How do we know this? Because in a perfect competition, price equals marginal cost. Cost equals marginal revenue equals average total cost. What's your question, Benjamin? What was going on with the average cost curve? I mean, I need more information than that. All right, well, Benjamin figures out his question. We'll move on. In a perfect competition, firms sell at the price level determined by the lowest point on the average cost curve, because that's the point at which the average cost curve hits marginal cost and marginal revenue. Hold on one second. Are you talking about the slides before? Correct. Yes. So in this slide before, where we have firms exiting the market, yeah, you can see that the average cost is greater than the price, and that is why firms are exiting the market. Okay. And this, again, those slides were for monopolistic competition, and here I'm just going over a review of perfect competition again. Okay. So in a perfect competition, price equals marginal cost equals marginal revenue equals average total cost, and profit equals 0. Okay, so the price level is equal to the lowest possible average total cost, which means that in a perfect competition, we have productive efficiency. Productive efficiency, that's a new vocabulary term for you. This is the point at which goods are produced at the lowest possible average cost. The most efficient point of production. In a monopolistic competition, firms are going to end up with a price that is still on the downward sloping portion of the average total cost curve, but not at the very bottom. So monopolistic competition is not productively efficient. In a monopolistic competition, we are not able to produce goods at the lowest possible average cost. It's also not the highest possible average cost. So you can see how as we make these models closer and closer to reality, we get less and less certain about the outcomes because we're making fewer and fewer assumptions. Okay. Questions on monopolistic competition before we move on to oligopoly, which is more fun. Okay. So if we start to drift to the right here from monopolistic competition closer to a monopoly, we get to a position where a few firms are selling similar products. Think Pepsi and Coca-Cola. If only 2 firms are in the industry, that's called a duopoly. We have, I know that it's the term few is pretty nebulous, and the term many over here is pretty nebulous. But, you know, if you've got 4 or 5 firms, I'd say you're in an oligopoly. Okay, so we have a few firms selling similar products. There's going to be some issues with this. We have few enough firms that they are able to communicate with each other and know exactly who their competitors are and what their competitors are doing, but we have enough firms, aka more than one, that they can fight with each other. And this is where we're going to start our introduction to game theory, which we will go over not next week because we don't have live classes, but the week after that, because I want to finish our spectrum of competition before we get into that. Okay. Oligopoly, small number of large firms have all or most of the sales in an industry. In the automotive industry, we've got Ford, GMC, Chrysler, cell phones, Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile. A duopoly, oligopoly with only 2 firms, Uber and Lyft. You're in an oligopoly. Imagine that there are 3 firms in the industry in which you are operating. You and those other firms, good question, Katie, we're getting there. You and those other firms have 2 options. You can work together. You can say, listen, we are the only ones producing soft drinks. Let's make as much money as we can while working as little as possible. Let's collude. Collusion, vocabulary term, working together. The word collusion has some sneaky connotations. Just means they're working together. So you're Pepsi and your friend is Coca-Cola, and you say, listen, if we produce fewer soft drinks than the market wants, we can keep our prices high. We can cause an artificial shortage of our goods in order to keep our price higher. So we're going to collude. We're going to hold down our output. We're going to charge a higher price, and then we're going to divide the profit amongst ourselves. An important thing to note with an oligopoly is we are assuming that there is a pie of profit to be had, and that when you collude, you are cutting that pie into equal pieces. When you compete with each other, that's when you see one firm trying to take more of the pie than agreed to. If oligopolists compete with each other, instead of colluding, instead of working together, they're going to act more like perfect competitors. When they collude, they act more like a monopoly. If they're all working together perfectly, they're essentially acting as one unit, and they're acting more like a monopoly. A cartel is the term that we use for a group of firms that have formally agreed to collude to produce monopoly output and sell at monopoly price. Yes, I'd say gasoline industry would be an oligopoly, Lillian. Okay, so there's two options that firms in an oligopoly have. We can work together, we can collude, we can form a cartel. Those are all one option, or we can compete with each other. Oh, that's a nonsense slide. Is that a nonsense slide? Yes. Okay, what does the demand curve look like in an oligopoly? This is a really unique looking demand curve. It's kinked. There's a kink in it. Let's talk about why this is. When firms in an oligopoly are competing, and I'll give you a spoiler alert, collusion for oligopolists rarely works out in the long run, rarely ever. There is so much opportunity and incentive to undercut your competitors on price or to produce more of a good than you agreed to, that in the long run, you're almost always going to see competition. And we'll talk about this. So when firms are competing in an oligopoly, they will match the price cuts of their competitors, but not the price increases. This makes sense, right? If Lillian and I are the only people in the world who produce paper towels, and we're both selling our paper towels for $5 a roll, and we're splitting the pie of profits that is available. She gets half the pie, I get half the pie. Lillian wakes up one morning and says, wait a minute, if I sell my paper towels for $4 a roll, I'm going to get more of this pie. I might even get the whole thing. So what do I do in response? I then must also cut my prices to $4 a roll. I have to do everything Lillian does, but only if what she's doing is decreasing prices. If Lillian wakes up and says, wait a minute, I bet I could increase my profits by raising the price of my paper towel rolls to $6 a roll, what do you think I should do? I shouldn't do anything. I should just sit here at my $5 a roll price and watch Lillian put herself out of business. So if you're competing, You're going to have to match your competitors' price cuts, but you just sit there and do nothing if they increase their prices. Okay, so let's do an example here. Say that a member in a cartel is supposed to produce a quantity of 10,000, and they're supposed to sell their paper towel rolls at a price of $500, $500 a roll, I guess. How do the other members of this cartel ensure that we stay a cartel, that we remain in collusion, and that we do not dissolve into competition? We can make sure that the demand curve your firm faces is this kinked shape. So there's two agreements that we have going on. Two things that you must agree on in order to be a colluding cartel. You must agree on the quantity you're producing and the price. If a firm expands the quantity it's producing, for example, to 11,000, we're going to see a fall in the price per unit. Why is this? Because I'm going to cut my prices. If you raise your price, your sales are going to decline. Why? Because I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to watch you put yourself out of business. So this strategy of matching all price cuts but not matching price increases is how we can discipline other members of the cartel. Okay. So I like to think of it this way. There's a cartel. We're all doing great. We're all agreeing to produce 10,000 items and to charge $500 for each item. And if one of you decides to increase your price to $5.50, well, that's no problem. You're going to put yourself out of business. The quantity demanded from you is going to fall. See, instead of about 10,000, you're only going to be selling 5,000 at that increased price. Now, if you decide to increase the quantity you're producing in order to try to get a larger share of the pie, the other firms in the cartel will instantly cut their prices, and they'll cut them temporarily. They'll cut their prices so low that you are put out of business. Sure, Tom, I'd say that. Katie, how do oligopoly markets work with some luxury products and the same non-luxury products? Interesting. I think that luxury producers, so I don't know, let's talk about like Gucci and Prada. Assuming that they are colluding as a cartel, then all these things apply. And I do not think that they care about off-brand alternatives, because an off-brand product is differentiated in a way that it attracts specific consumers that Gucci and Prada aren't interested in anyway. If you're in the market for something that is a cheaper version of a luxury item, Gucci and Prada don't even care about you. You're not in their consumer pool. So a way that I like to remember that the demand curve is kinked in an oligopoly is I like to think about having a bunch of firms that are colluding, and then we've got Frank. And Frank is getting a little bit too big for his britches. And Frank decides to increase his output in order to make more money, and so we shove him off a cliff. We shove him off a cliff. This cliff of the kink demand curve, if that's something that helps you. Yeah, I hope that was a good answer, Katie. Okay, let's see. This is some game theory. Do I have time to get into this? No, we will get into that next week, so we will do this slide instead. So it would seem that if me and Katie and Lillian wanted to form a cartel and we're colluding, and I say, okay, we have 2 hours to operate in the market. What's the first thing we do? Well, I'm going to cut my prices right away, or I'm going to increase my output. I want to get more of that pie instantly because we're only operating in the market for a short amount of time. So by the time you all figure out what I'm doing, I've already taken all your consumers and the game is over. So one way to ensure that collusion and that cartels hold up in the long run is simply that, to have a long run. If the long run exists, then we have new interesting ideas such as reputation, such as punishment, such as equilibrium developing over time. Okay. All right, I'm going to get into this. Damn. No, I'm not going to get into that. I keep saying I'm going to get into that. Okay. So instead of everything happening all at once instantaneously, like we were talking about in a perfect competition, everything's happening so instantaneously that from our point of view as an observer looking in, profits are always zero. Now we have this idea of existing in a market for a day and having to exist in the market for the next day and the next day and the next day. So we have consequences now. We have reputations now. If you cut your prices on the first day, the other firms in the oligopoly are going to punish you the next day. You now have a reputation of breaking cartels, of breaking collusion agreements, so you're likely to be kicked out of a cartel in the future. If you're kicked out of a cartel, you are now essentially a small individual firm competing with a monopoly, because if a cartel is working efficiently, it acts as one large organism, one monopoly. Prices are always sticky, Katie, which is another reason that this extended timeline is important. Prices are sticky, and so it is costly to change your prices. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud here. In reality, prices are sticky, but I would say don't think about that here. We're trying to make these points along the spectrum as simple as possible. In reality, prices are absolutely sticky. In reality, there are knowledge costs. I might be secretly selling more output at a lower price for a while before the other firms catch on to me. Okay. Any questions on this? We have 6 minutes. I'm going to leave the stream on for anyone to ask questions in the live chat. But this is all I'm doing for today. Next week, no live classes. Come to me with questions you have, and that's how we will develop your knowledge. And then the week after that, we'll go into game theory. I'm going to have your homework up by today. If you look at it today, you're going to get freaked out because we haven't gone into some of the stuff. But I say go for it. All right, go ahead and send me your questions, please. Invisible hook, Peyton, it's in the syllabus. You know how to write a book report, fine. Yes, Benjamin. Monopolistic competition graphs. Here they are. We'll start with this one where your firm is making a profit, meaning that your price is above your average cost, which causes other firms to enter. You are welcome. Let me think about that for a second. Average cost is going to be, it's not going to move, Benjamin. The thing that's moving here is price. As more firms enter the market, they drive price down because they're competing with each other. Great question. Which is better for the consumer, monopolistic competition or oligopoly? As a consumer myself, I would prefer a market structure in which the firms I'm buying from are not communicating with each other and effectively colluding. This depends on whether the oligopoly is a cartel or if they're competing. If they're competing with each other, I was looking at mattresses online today. You know, we've got the Casper mattress, we've got the Purple mattress. There's another, Tuft and Needle was another one. I don't want those mattress companies working together to keep prices high and output low. I want them competing with each other for my valuable dollar. So it depends on how the oligopoly is working in reality. In general, monopolistic competition is better, I think. Especially because there's, never mind. Okay, all right, that is it. Please let me know any questions you have. Goodbye.